right, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to have you here on this Brotherhood breakfast in February. Thanks for coming on this holiday weekend. I know a number of people may have gone away for a while, but I'm glad to see the crowd here. We're very pleased to have Professor Mehnaz Afridi of Manhattan College with us this morning. Thank Marty Canengeiser for helping to arrange this morning's event. Dr. Afridi for joining us. Dr. Afridi is the Director of Holocaust, Genocide, Interfaith Education at Manhattan College. Her classes look at contemporary issues of religious identity like gender, race, and class. Classes pay close attention to diverse interpretations of the Qu'ran in various Muslim communities and focuses on issues of religion, theology, and politics. Dr. Afridi will share with us today some experiences, and then as we do, we'll open to questions afterwards. Before getting started, we'll just mention that we have some upcoming events. The next Brotherhood Breakfast in 4 weeks, on March 20th, will be Westchester DA Mimi Roca. Stay tuned as April and May events are taking shape as we speak. You'll also see the Yom HaShoah candle mailing will be happening in time for Yom HaShoah this year, which is in late April. Anyway, we'll give thanks again to Jane and the group at the Larchmont Temple office who helped to make these events happen as well, and to all of you for joining us. And I think without further ado, I can turn it over to Dr. Afridi.
Thank you so much, everyone. Everyone can hear me? Larry?
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you so much to Marty Canengeiser, who was just so persistent on getting me here. I really, really thank him. And I think that he's been just so patient with me. So thank you so much, Marty. And I was telling Marty, Larry, thank you. And Jane, thank you. Sure. And Joel Brill for recommending me, because Amy Goldman and I work on the Arva Institute together. So she's known me for quite some time. It's been a really busy time, as I was telling Marty, Larry, and Jane, for people like us who are teaching anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, issues of race. There's so many issues that we've had, since really 2015, in terms of this becoming a social media kind of engagement for everybody. I also want to thank the Larchmont New York Temple Brotherhood. I just told everyone that I went to Scarsdale High, so I'm very familiar with Westchester, and I live in Westchester. So I wanted to share with you my journey as a Muslim, how I see anti-Semitism in the Islamic world. And the two questions I wanted to frame my talk with is, what is my moral duty as a Muslim about understanding other communities and other faiths? And that's been really important to me. It's been really important in my book, Shoah Through Muslim Eyes, in terms of Islamic justice. And then how can I bridge the seemingly irreparable relations between Jews and Muslims? And I think we've made certain strides in terms of being in the United States, but it's like we get pulled together and we get pulled apart. And I really made it my life's mission to sort of think about alternative ways that we can have conversations around very challenging topics, and I'll get to that. So my journey as Muslim, I was born in Pakistan and I was raised in Western Europe. I was raised in beautiful places like Switzerland, Zurich, Geneva, Luxembourg. Then I went to London, where I learned English. And then from London, I went to the Middle East, Dubai, for 3 years. And then I came to the United States to Scarsdale High when I was a sophomore. So I came kind of later in high school. But I just want to share how this experience was indelible to who I am, because there were very few Muslims and Jews and Hindus in our classes throughout. when I was in Europe, and we were kind of hanging out together all the time. We had a little international crowd. We had, different religions. We looked a little different. We had parents who were different culturally. So we're sort of the kind of outsiders. And so my parents, both Muslim, raised me to accept other traditions. And in London, I remember I had a Russian Orthodox friend, and I celebrated Hanukkah with her a couple of times. And then she came to my house for Eid al-Fitr, which is the end of Ramadan. Ramadan begins, by the way, April 2nd. And I never really thought of Jews as other until I got to the Middle East, where I went to actually a very reputable, really good, very tough school, where the supervisors would block out the word Israel and Jew from my textbook. So I turned around to my friends, and I was very young, right? So think about that. And I would say, well, why are they doing this? And they said, oh, they do this every year, just ignore it. And then I started to realize there were no Jews, there were just Christians and Muslims at this school. And then I came to Scarsdale High, where my parents in the beginning lived on Mamaroneck Road. And they got harassing calls saying, you effing Arabs, get out of here, which was really disturbing. So my mother, being, new to the country, called the police, and the police says, well, there's not much we can do, which they could only, maybe, I don't know, in like the late 80s, trace a call or whatever. And then in school, I was also othered. I had never seen so much money, or the way that, it was a cultural shift for me completely. So all of these things really change and transform me, but my curiosity never left me about how people thought of Jews. I asked my mother several times about Israel, and she said that it was a political conversation that I was not ready to have. And then my godmother, who happened to be Swiss, God bless her, she passed away, went to Jerusalem and sent me a card of the Dome of the Rock. And she wrote on that postcard, dear little Mona, Mona is like my pet name, I wish you could come here with me and see this beautiful city, love from Israel. And so it just kind of stuck with me. And then long story forward, I went to Syracuse University, and I worked with Alan Berger, who is a post-Holocaust literature scholar. He does a lot of work on American Holocaust, and I became his teaching assistant just coincidentally. And I started to really study the Holocaust. And it wasn't as if I didn't know about the Holocaust in Europe. They do teach it, but they teach it under the guise of World War II. It's not this sort of stark understanding of what the Holocaust was. And I was blown away by what I was learning, to the point where I really became engrossed in it, where Dr. Berger asked me to teach his classes when he was traveling. And then for my master's, I did 20th century Germany and looked at anti-Semitism and German philosophy. And then I ended up doing a PhD in Islamic literature. So I wear two hats. So what Larry didn't mention is I teach all the Holocaust classes at Manhattan College. Manhattan College is in Riverdale. It's a Lasallian Catholic college. It's a small college. It's a lovely place. And they have been extremely supportive. When I was hired 10 years ago, there was a lot of backlash against me because I'm not Jewish, and how could a Muslim woman carry the memory of survivors? But the college stood by me, and there were a lot of people who did stand by me, like Michael Birnbaum and other Jewish mentors, Sandra Gilman, and a lot of my colleagues. So it was a very challenging time, but it really was an important time in retrospect, because it's been 10 years. I have such deep, profound relationships in Riverdale from like the Reform to the Orthodox to the Chabad to the conservative to the Reconstructionist temples. So it's like we have become a community, and in a sense, what we needed to do, I think, was to trust one another and give one another a chance to sort of see what we can do with each other's history. And I think I'm just organically, okay, I didn't do anything, but I became an example of that. And the only example in the nation, where I'm the only Muslim who is heading a Holocaust center. At our center, we focus on the lessons of Holocaust. I do trainings with my students. We opened up an exhibit in 2019 on a survivor, Herman Ziering, and his daughter, Debbie Ziering, and I are very good friends. She coincidentally gave me a box, which I turned into an exhibit. He was a Nazi hunter. And so I'm teaching my Catholic and a lot of Muslim students and some Jewish students now about the lessons of the Holocaust, but what it means to Catholics and Muslims. So I've had this tremendous opportunity to be in this small college in Riverdale, which at one point had the highest living Holocaust survivors in the nation. I don't know where it is now, but our statistics are really off in terms of survivors. So I wanted to tell that story because I think it's important for you to know where I'm coming from. I am Pakistani, I'm a immigrant, and I have really embraced the United States for its freedom, especially the freedom of religion, because we tend to forget that that's something we have here in this country. I've lived in Europe where you don't have freedom of religion. I've seen in Muslim countries where you don't have freedom of religion. So I think it's something we need to celebrate, especially as Jews and Muslims, especially now when people are trying to, kind of eliminate what we wear, how we eat, where we go, attacks on synagogues, attacks on mosques, especially on synagogues, and what these repercussions can do to us. So my work really is informed by who I am, but also because I wanted to really engage the Muslim community and the Islamic community, Islamic countries, I would say, about the Holocaust. I think the problem with the anti-Semitism in my community is not just because Muslims hate Jews at all, but it's out of ignorance, it's out of propaganda, and it's because of the geopolitical problems of Israel and Palestine. So one of the ways I want to begin with talking about anti-Semitism in the Islamic context is that there are many places that I've been to in the Muslim world where there are no Jews, but there's still anti-Semitism. Recently, I built a curriculum for a Muslim high school in Brooklyn, where the first day, and there are in this particular class, I mean, it's non-denominational, like, Jews can go, and there were Jews in the school and Christians. And the first day, I asked them about their stereotypes and tropes of Jews. And their stereotypes were Jews control everything. They are all in Congress. They are rich. I mean, these tropes that you hear all the time that are mythologies that were created about Jews, not just during Nazi times, but even before that, right? In terms of anti-Semitism, which is the longest standing hatred in terms of a religion and also being racialized as Jews. And within 10 minutes with those kids in high school, I was able to dispel those stereotypes because statistically, it just didn't make sense. And they were kind of like, oh, wow, how did that happen? And I think they came with those stereotypes because those stereotypes are still alive in our country. And I mean, America. There are Muslim Americans that have been raised here. They are obviously involved with social media. They are engaged with social media. These are the messages they're getting, not just from their family and community, but also from social media. So we have two-pronged problems, right? One is families that are not understanding of the Jewish community, don't know much about it, or buy into the mythology. And then we have social media, which becomes a huge issue. The second issue that I see is education. I mean, Morocco just in the last 2 years, actually, Morocco has been in the forefront of educating Muslims about the Holocaust. I've done a couple of programs in Pakistan on the Holocaust through an organization called I Am Your Protector in Dubai, UAE. Recently, they opened up a Holocaust exhibit, which is marvelous, and educating people about that. So there are certain beginnings. There are certain Arabs and non-Muslim Arabs that are beginning to address the question of the Holocaust. But I always feel like it's not enough, because for me, I studied Judaism and I studied anti-Semitism, starting with deicide in terms of Christianity. I looked at the medieval times. I looked at Jews under Islamic empires. Jews fared better, but not the best. There were still pushback against Jews under these empires. And then I also look at these tropes and where these tropes came from. And the research that's been done has been really interesting about young, especially young urban males in, for example, places like Europe. You know, how do they become anti-Semitic, right? What are they thinking? What's substantial? What's factual? So I want to read you something, and this is in my book. If you can buy it, I mean, it's a very, how do you say? I wrote it both academically, but really like as a conversation, so people would understand. Anyone can read it. You don't have to have a background. You get to know about me, and you get to know about my experiences, but at the same time, you get a lot of academic research while you're reading the book. So I'm going to give you an example of anti-Semitism on the street. So one of an interviewer is going around and he's asking young males, you know, what do you know about Jews? And, you know, sometimes they refer to Islamic history or conflicts between Muhammad and his adherents on one side, Jewish tribes on the other. They illustrated justify enmity against Jews. Muslims' hostilities against Jews today were framed as revenge against Jews for things they did in the past or part of an ongoing historical struggle with the Jews. However, now this is what's interesting, is that references to Islamic history were usually vague. The following French interviewer's argument is a good example. He was not sure what particular kind of mischief Jews made, but he was adamant that the Jews are to blame, that what they did is unforgivable, and that their actions resulted in eternal animosity between Muslims and Jews. And here's the conversation. I'm just going to read it out. So this is the young man, and he says, we have a history with them. I don't know how much about this kind of thing, but a long time ago, I think that they were the ones who betrayed the prophet. After that, the Muslims, there's a story like that. Yeah, that's the one. It's something that makes it worth going to war with them. And the interviewer goes, even now? And then he goes, no, not war, but well, we don't talk to them. It's not a war between Arabs and Jews. I don't know. It's about religion. They did something that wasn't good, and it's unpardonable. It's weird. You can't, everyone is obsessed about it. They have to change it. It's the Jews who did something bad. It's too late. It was at the beginning and given the way they are. So there's absolutely no substance in terms of where this is coming from. And it's interesting. And when I started to do this research, I started to realize, wow, so, you know, we Muslims have this sort of anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, I would say more so, also not about the religion. And they're always excusing the religion, but it's also anti-Semitism. And I try to explain this to Muslim communities. Where does this come from? And I started doing research and realizing that this kind of anti-Semitism was transported by Nazi propaganda. There's a wonderful book by David Mutadil. It's called Islam in Nazi Germany. And I reference it in my own book. And he's done this marvelous research on how Nazis wanted to align with the Arab world. They had no allies left. As some of you may know, the Mufti met with Hitler once and was given nothing, was not really, he was rebuked because he wanted to meet him a second time. The Mufti was clearly anti-Semitic, but did not create what happened in the Holocaust. So I want to be clear with that. But there was this sort of propaganda that went into places like Egypt, like Libya, like Tunisia, like Algeria, that was transcribing in Arabic, you know, the bad Jews, and look, they're taking over. And it was a weird time, right? So you had the height of immigration going into what was Palestine, and then you had this propaganda going into North Africa. So it's a very, very interesting moment in terms of that. So I did work on North Africa and the Holocaust, and I found terrible stories about Arabs betraying Jews, but I also found some jewels and some diamonds where, you know, Arabs risked their lives and saved Jews, where Arabs didn't want to go with the Vichy government, that were imprisoned with Jews at the same time. And there's a diary that I found by Berkani, written in 1964, that I translated from French to English, that I use in my book as well. And I'll read you some of it in a bit. But it's so interesting how the colonial Vichy was trying to control Arabs and Jews, but also pit them against each other, creating this tension of, oh, look at these Jews, they're the colonials. So a lot of that kind of propaganda went into the Arab world in the 1920s, but also really highly in the 30s. 20s, I say, because of the mass migration into Palestine, the fall of the Ottomans in 1922, which was huge for the Muslim world. And then you had in 1940s, especially between 1941 and 1944, a lot of propaganda going into the Arab world. And what's not justifiable is that people were open to it, right? They had to have an enemy and a scapegoat at that time of the height of the colonial empire, the Muslim empire falling, the kind of split that had happened in the Arab world. And I just want to pause here and make us understand that when I teach the Holocaust, I have a class that I call Muslims in the Holocaust, and we do, and a lot of kids take this class because it's interesting to them. I mean, how are Muslims connected? And so we talk about the Holocaust, what it was, but we also talk about North Africa, the different laws that were set down for Jews and Arabs, particular stories of Jews and Arabs during and under the Vichy government in places like Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and Libya. And we look at racialization of both the Arab and the Jew. And it's a fascinating way to teach the Holocaust because it brings in my Muslim students, it makes Catholics understand what race is and how it's functioning in terms of anti-Semitism, but also Islamophobia. And it also leave them with rescue stories and positivities where we do, you know, workshops on who is an upstander and a bystander. But I'm going to read you a couple of things, and then I'm going to move into, hold on. I mean, there's so much I want to talk to you about. Can you tell? And there's just such a rich history in terms of this. And I think there are some now wonderful scholars that have started to do this kind of work in terms of Muslims doing work on the Holocaust, not directly like I do, but there's Omar Baum, he's a Moroccan. He's co-edited a book with Sarah Horowitz on North Africa and the Holocaust that I use. And there are different kinds of essays on Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. So I'm very excited that this field is actually happening. You know, it's starting to happen. And I think this is a very important field because people are starting to understand how colonialism was happening for the Arabs. And I'm not comparing colonialism, by the way, to the Holocaust at all, because I make the argument in my book that the Holocaust is unprecedented. And I explain why I think that. But I want to just, okay, so this is the diary I was talking about in terms of Berkani. The account was written in 1965 by Mohammed Azarki Berkani. He's an Algerian Muslim man whose memoir was entitled 3 Years of Camps, a year of concentration camp, 2 years of disciplinary camp, Dejan Bouge Régis sous Oranais, Vichy government, 1940 to 1943. This memoir discusses his torture by the Vichy regime for dissension and participation in the Algerian nationalist movement, an ENA Star of North Africa. So the Algerians and every Muslim, I think, had a resistant group. They wanted to be independent, you know, away from the French. They had been colonized for a very long time, and they had resistant movements. Berkani recounts the stories of activists within France who went to Algeria to fight for Algerian independence. But more importantly, he describes the concentration camps, where he was tortured and persecuted. He begins his memoir with the following. He says, I would like to let the readers know about 3 years that my Muslim friends and Europeans spent like me in this cruel camp, now impossible to forget. And he describes the various camps and their infrastructure, and it is clear that there are different sections. So he says, and just quickly, first they put all the people together, Muslims and Europeans in the same section, in the same room, but just a few days before our arrival, they were separated. The Muslims in the first section and Europeans, including Israelis, he calls them Israelis because it's post 1948. There were not Israelis then, he says. In the second section, we arrived on the 27th of June, 1940, and the camp had been open since the 1st of May within the same year. The first contingents arrived there on the May of 15th, 1940. And then he builds, the officer, the Captain Derrico, builds these, has these walls in between, say, what he calls the Europeans, and he really means Israelis, and then he means Algerians. And he takes those walls away wishing that they would kill each other. But you know what happened instead? The Arabs and the Jews bonded together. And Berkani says they were like brothers that I've never had before. So, I mean, this is a moment to sort of think about, right? To think about differently in terms of Jewish-Muslim relations and what happened historically, and how we can perhaps, look at history, look at the situation, two very different situations, but at the same time for Jews and Arabs. I don't know if it's making sense. You can ask me questions. And then finally, I wanted to share the most important thing, I think, and I have a display at Manhattan College about this, is the rescue stories. Very little is known about Muslim rescue of Jews during the Holocaust. There was, Iranian diplomat Sardari who rescued Jews. He was in France and he changed the passports. There was a Tunisian man who kept a Muslim family in the back of his house. He was finally recognized at Yad Vashem. And Albania cannot be a forgotten story. 70% Muslims, 30% Christians, the only country in Europe to save all of its Jews. If not that, there were more Jews in Albania after World War II, because Albania let Jews come in, and they changed the names of Jews. They kept them in their families. They put veils on women and kept them safe. And there's a beautiful story, you may know of it. It's called Besa. It's also called Promise in Albanian. And it's a cultural, but it's also an Islamic principle, where Albanians knew that Jews were their brothers and they couldn't believe what was going on. And so therefore they opened up their borders and really, really, really had to risk their lives, because they had both communists coming in and Nazis coming into Albania to check if there were any Jews there. So it's a marvelous story. It's a story that I think we should celebrate more and think about more in terms of Jewish-Muslim relations. And one of the stories, I'm just going to read it, is that many narratives of Albanian Muslims who saved Jews because of their own understanding of Islam. As one of the rescuer asserts, we lived in the town Elbasan. I was 12 years old. My two other brothers are younger. It was just a few steps from here that our father sheltered 6 Jews in a stone house, much like the one we lived in. It is in the Qu'ran, and in the name of God, we help all humans. There were Raphael Kamhi, Chaim Isaac, Leon Isaac, and with his wife and 2 children. The Isaac family spoke Serbo-Croatian, as did our father. In 1945, they all left for Yugoslavia. Leon Isaac came back for a visit in 1948. He and his family were living in Macedonia. To show his gratitude for saving the lives of his family, he wanted to give my parents a restaurant in Macedonia and offered to pay all of their expenses for 10 years. That's pretty amazing, right? And And then he goes, our mother did not want to live in Macedonia, so we stayed in Elbasan. So she refused. After 1949, we lost contact with the Isaacs. The communists then imprisoned our father. We have never sought recognition, but we are glad for this opportunity to have our father remembered. It is in the Quran that in the name of God, we help all humans. And this is a very interesting story about Albania, because Albania was also, I mean, the same people that rescued Jews were killed in the streets by the communists right after World War II. It was a very brutal time. And I was very, very honored that the last president of Albania, Nishani, came to Manhattan College because we had this exhibit and we talked about this sort of horrible, brutal time of Nazism and communism that went on in terms of especially Eastern Europe. And we also need to think about, also Eastern Europe had and has a lot of Muslims. For example, I go to Bosnia, Sarajevo a lot to work on the Bosnian genocide. And there are things very, very tense even today now in terms of the government and the kind of tension that's going on again between Bosnia and Serbia. So what I'm going to do now, let's see, is, and I know you probably have a lot of questions. I have a lot to say too, is to show you a video. One of the things I felt was really important for me to do, and this video is now old, so I look younger, but it was a time I had just had my daughter, and it was a strange thing. I started to, I stayed home with my daughter when she was born because that's what my husband and I planned. And I was kind of part-timing and working on the Holocaust and thinking about whether I should write this book or not. But then the one thing I wanted to do was to interview survivors as a Muslim woman. And I had been to the Museum of Tolerance. This is in Los Angeles when I lived there. And so I contacted the Museum of Tolerance and I said, you know, hey, I want to interview survivors. How can I reach them? And there was a lovely woman. And she was just so ecstatic that a Muslim woman was going to do this. So she put me in touch with survivors and I went to their homes. I have transcribed all of my interviews in my book, but I got to interview people like Robert Clary, who was on Hogan Heroes. He was the lieutenant, the French lieutenant in the kitchen. I got to interview Renee Firestone and Elizabeth Mann, who were both in Auschwitz. And while I was interviewing them, I had my friend who was a cameraman, and he just wanted to do something because he had taken a class with me. He just thought, you know, this would be a good voice to put on TV, which never happened. But he realized that after the first interview we did with Robert Clary, that we needed 2 cameras because the survivors were so interested in Islam. And they were so interested in why I was actually a Muslim and how could such a nice girl like me be a Muslim, which I think is a very fascinating conversation. I didn't expect it. And it kind of happened. So I wanted to share that. And I have to say that this interviewing survivors was very hard because I did these interviews in a very short span. And there were times I couldn't sleep. There were times I couldn't, you know, really function. And here I had a little baby, which is probably a good thing. And then when I moved to Riverdale, I also befriended a lot of survivors here locally that came to my house and had dinners. And actually on April 27th, my center is hosting another survivor. And I just want to say how amazingly emotional these interviews were and how I became close to survivors in my time of writing this book, learning about them. And all I wanted to do was, you know, speak to the world and acknowledge on paper that the Holocaust happened, indeed, that it was 6+ million Jews, that the Holocaust was unprecedented. And the chapter that I transcribed my survivors' interviews is called The Document, because I feel like there's so much relativization around the Holocaust and distortion, and unfortunately denial in some places like Iran, as some of you may know. So let me just share this video and hopefully we can have a conversation. You know many Muslims. Have you talked to Muslims? in the
No, I
past?
wish I would. Because for me, it doesn't matter. You are Muslim, you are a human being. I love people.
Mhm.
When I speak, I never ever think about that is Muslim or Catholic or Protestant or whatever.
Mhm.
I just see a human being. And that's the way I was raised, actually.
What is your main message to Muslims about the Holocaust?
I don't know if anyone completely understand what happened there. You know, I mean, what happened, that's true.
Mhm.
Why that did happen and the whole world was looking at and didn't do anything, that's one thing I don't understand. But one thing I understand, that we should all like each other, talk to each other, and try to understand each other.
Talking to you, I forget that you are Muslim today.
Yes,
Okay, I totally forget that.
but that's good.
Y-
We shouldn't look at
yeah,
our.
I know.
That's
but
precisely the point of this.
I know.
practice.
I
We shouldn't,
realize that
yeah.
the question I have for the Muslims: do you really believe that any paper we sign is going to have an effect on the children that you teach to kill? That's the question I want to ask.
Okay, perfect question. The gas chambers, especially, are seen by a lot of people as a fabrication. As difficult as it is for me to ask you this, could you perhaps shed light on that from your perspective?
Well, only a totally ignorant human being would say today that it didn't happen. I don't have the right to forgive. It's not my job to forgive. God is the only one that can forgive. I only have to remember and be aware all the time of what can happen. So, I try to do my job. Like you are doing yours. Have you been threatened?
Have I been threatened? Yes.
I'm sure.
As a Muslim, yes. Both in my community and outside of my
I'm
community.
sure.
So, I mean, I also spend a lot of time, Renee, going to Jewish temples
Mhm.
and showing similarities of justice between Judaism and Islam.
I don't care what color, what creed, what you do in life, as long as you're a decent person, that's enough for me. Now let me ask you a question. Are you a religious Muslim?
I believe, yes.
You believe
Okay.
you believe you believe there's somebody upstairs who's going to guide your life, who's going to make you a better person.
I don't think that person is going to make me a better person, but I think there's something there that is not guiding me.
Then you go through your life with rules, the rules that the Muslims are giving you. Is that what it is? I'm asking you. I'm not judging you. I'm asking you a question.
No, I don't go with the rules that.
Because a
are
lot
given.
of people do that,
Right.
including the Jewish religion.
If a Muslim is watching, what do you want to say to them?
I say, get an education, learn about life. Don't be in your little sphere only, and just don't see anybody else but yourself. And if you do that, if you get educated, maybe we'll have a better chance in this world.
So there's stories that were told during Muhammad's life in the 6th century. Jihad means struggle.
Okay.
So jihad has several connotations. One is holy war. Not direct translation, but the result is holy war, which means if someone comes to your house and forces you and your family out or kills you, you have the right to defend yourself with struggling against them through jihad. However, it doesn't mean that you kill them. The Holocaust is unique, right? Holocaust was not just in Germany, it was in Poland, it was in Czech, it was in Italy, it was all over, it was in Tunisia. So the whole point of the Holocaust was to exterminate Jews off the face of the earth. I don't care if someone wants to sit there and deny it, they can do it. They're blue in the face. Okay, so can you hear me? So, I mean, there's a lot more on that in terms of transcripts, but I just wanted to show you how powerful these interviews were for me, and how meaningful it is that I got to do these interviews. And I also was very close with another survivor here, Gisela Glazer, Martin Spett, who I spent a lot of time with, and they were also incredible to me. And I had them work with students, both Catholic and Muslim students, with yeshiva students, and they worked together a whole semester and interviewed each other. And I think it was the most marvelous project I've done, because everybody was from a different religion. They had racial differences, they had socioeconomic differences, and age generation differences. And we videotaped these projects. And, I made everyone think on a different level and think about their questions. And it broke stereotypes, because a lot of my friends that were survivors lived in the South Bronx in very modest means. And so, especially the Catholic and Muslim students were like, oh, okay, no, not all Jews are rich. I mean, there was this kind of preoccupation when I teach about Judaism, even on the first year students, that there's somehow a billion Jews and that they control everything, right? I mean, it's like ample. I can't explain it to you because I witness it all the time. It's very few students that say, oh yeah, maybe 14 to 15 million Jews. But then when they're looking at statistics where you have 2.5 billion Christians, 1.7 billion Muslims, and then 14 million Jews, they're like, what? So there's something really very much like, Julius Streicher's, the Sturmer during the Holocaust, where there was this sort of like propaganda that is still going on, not just with Muslims, but also here in the United States, that somehow, I mean, listen, Jews are only 1% of this country and Muslims are less than 1%. But you'd think that we were like taking over the whole country, right? So I think these things are really important for education, for us to educate our kids about, because they're the ones that are going to go out there and inform people in terms of who we are, whether we're Jewish or Muslim or secular. It doesn't really matter. I'm not biased in terms of your beliefs, but I do really feel that Jews and Muslims have this weird platform in America where, we are really the minority, and we are a successful group, actually, Muslims and Jews, professionally and in terms of education, if you look at the statistics. But we're so small that we become this sort of loud kind of thing. I mean, the Muslim ban was not nice for us, right? I mean, my daughter was 8 years old, and it was the first moment in her life where she felt like she did not belong in America. And I was like, no, you do. Then she was worried that her mother was going to be taken away because, I wasn't born here. So there's, we created fear in a girl and othered her in an instant. And I'm talking about my own daughter. So imagine how many other kids, at least she has me to talk to, that we're doing this, that don't feel part of the American reality. Anyway, I'm going to stop there because I know people have questions. I know Larry turned this thing. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Dr. Afridi. That was very, very interesting stuff here. We're going to depart from convention a little bit. I'm going to ask one of our fellow members, participants, Minna Immerman, to just speak. She put forth a very interesting question, observation, and a follow-up about her own personal experiences and family. So Minna, please take it away.
Thank you, Larry. Professor, this has just been profoundly interesting and very moving. I think I have an interesting perspective as an American Jew. In 1964, when I was a baby, I went to the Peace Corps in North Africa, in Tunisia, and I lived there for 2 years as a teacher. And it was just at the time when Tunisia had just become independent in 62. Many Tunisian Jews were leaving Tunisia for France. They weren't forced to leave, but they felt economically, now that Tunisia was going to be Arab as opposed to French ruled, their kids wouldn't have an opportunity. And so, as you know, thousands and thousands of Tunisian Jews left. And of course, they went to France and they weren't very welcomed in France, the Pieds Noirs. They were discriminated against. I think they're still discriminated against. And here I was, an American Jew. My friends and colleagues knew I was Jewish, but they didn't understand. I was mostly American. They didn't see me as Jewish because I wasn't Tunisian Jewish or I wasn't Israeli Jewish. They just saw me as an American. And I learned a great deal about their culture and Islam. And I am still to this day so aware of how similar the cultures are, the Arabs and the Jews. It's two cousins. I mean, the values and the family values and the importance of hospitality and the importance of justice and the importance of food. I mean, it's just the same culture. Fast forward to the present, my daughter, about 3 or 4 years ago, married a Persian Muslim gentleman. And so now we have a mixed Muslim Jewish family. Again, it's the exact same culture. I'm always saying to my in-laws that if I didn't know they were Iranian Muslims, I would just say they were Jewish. I mean, it's the exact same culture. You feel very comfortable when we're together. They're very respectful of Jews. Jews are very important in the Quran, and Islam comes from Jewish roots. And they were very welcoming to my daughter. We were very welcoming to Mehdi. I mean, we're doing our part for Jewish-Muslim relations. But Suzanne's stepson has had terrible, terrible experiences with discrimination in his high school, starting in 2015. I mean, guess why? Everything had been fine, and suddenly in 2015, he was bullied. He was beat up. I mean, high school was a terrible, terrible experience for him. Now he's in college and he's online and he loves it because he doesn't have to, be involved with people. But I just wanted to share that when you get to know people and it's no longer just a generalization, it's really almost the same culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I went to the Hebrew University for 5 months on this grant when I was a college student, and I remember at that time I had a Pakistani passport. So the Israeli embassy gave me like a white sheet because a lot of professors wrote "let her go in," which is kind of crazy, but they were like, okay, you're basically on your own because you just have a green card and you have, our countries don't recognize each other. And I said, that's fine, I'll be at the university, Plus in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, I'm in exile. This is so Jewish of me, like this kind of fantasy. But I went to Hebrew University and I was probably the only Muslim in that program, and I was studying biblical archaeology. And I went into the Palestinian territories and I was hanging out with Jews, of course, and I came back. I think that trip was so important to me because I came back saying, what a waste. What a waste. These people are the same. There's so much commonality, not the same, but there's so much commonality. And what did they both want? Peace. What did I hear all the time? Even there was like aggression, the ultimate reality was this is what we want. And I think that really also sat in my mind for a long time and made me think about, and I'm not Palestinian, I'm not Israeli. But Palestine is such an important piece of being Muslim, which actually I have critique of, because I feel like I just had a Rohingya survivor come to my college and speak. She was incarcerated for 7 years. She's Muslim. But I feel that, or the Uyghurs that I've been advocating with since Elia Engel was in office, I feel like we have to treat Muslims equally. And when Darfur was going on, I remember 2005 being in LA, and Jewish Watch was helping me, educate work and do things in workshops. So I also feel like there is a certain imbalance because of where Israel is. But also there's an imbalance of how we Muslims, and this is my self-critique, are giving certain Muslims more priority. And I think that is a problem in terms of how we see geopolitical power. And that, I think we need to sort of, I understand that that's important in some ways, but it's so hard because we have such an emotional reaction and such a knee jerk reaction without knowing the other, not having emotional ties with someone, not having these discussions where you say, okay, I really don't like what she's saying, but I'm just going to hold it for a while and listen for a second and acknowledge that she is in pain or he is in pain in a different way. It's not an Olympic pain level. So I think those are the conversations we need to have to sort of break through this idea of Jewish-Muslim relations, but also, you know, who are Arabs? And, you know, I'm Asian Muslim, and my daughter says she's an Asian Muslim, and the kids at school say to her, oh, you're just passing white. I mean, that's ridiculous. Like, you know, so we have all of these layers of issues going on. Anyway, thank you.
Just one more thing I wanted to say, Larry. I'm sorry, I don't want to monopolize the discussion. You mentioned that the Vichy government pitted Jews and Arabs against each other for their benefit. And isn't that exactly what Trump has done? He's taken minorities and he's pitted them against each other and told each that the other is to blame for their problems. And that way, you know, he solidified his power. I mean, it's such an old strategy, because if all the minorities came together, of course, we would be a majority. But he keeps, you know, he keeps them all pitted against each other.
You know,
The Republicans, I'm sorry.
yeah, I mean, in the Muslim world, we have the term divide and conquer.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Larry.
Unmute myself. Thanks so much for sharing from your personal life and experiences. A couple more questions here. So one of us here writes, of course, millions of non-Jews were killed by the Nazis in the Holocaust, but only the Jews were singled out for a final solution. Holocaust remembrance days and Holocaust studies seem increasingly to universalize the Holocaust in an attempt to show consequences of hate. Do you see this occurring? Do you have any thoughts about it?
I mean, I think it's a really great question. You know, recently when Whoopi Goldberg said that the Holocaust, you know, the extermination, the Holocaust was not about race. I mean, of course, she, you know, I think was saying it in her context. I know that Jonathan Greenblatt forgave her, and I think that's good. It's an educational moment, and we should not cancel people. I really don't believe in that. I think we need to have these hard questions. But I think this question about Holocaust, right? I mean, I am a Muslim teaching the Holocaust, and my colleagues, whether at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC, USC Shoah Foundation, where I was last weekend, that's why we couldn't have the Zoom, or, you know, ADL or AJC, or even my school, constantly say, Mehnaz, we need to teach it more. Nobody knows about it. So my angle is expand it. I'm co-editing a book with my colleague, Mark Salemsek, who is from Canada, but he's at University of Nebraska, and it's called International Approaches to the Holocaust. So what happened to the Jews in Japan and China and in Palestine and in, you know, Iran and these places? Because I think we need to make this relevant to everybody. Because if we're going to, and I'm sorry to say this, just hand it over to the Christian white men who kind of controlled the field for a long time, but Christian and Jewish men, it's not going to go many places. I mean, just recently, my student is doing a project on homosexuals in the Holocaust. And why was that different? That was different because they thought it was a behavioral problem, not a racial problem, right? Roma, Sinti, and the Jews were the racial issue. The other people who were persecuted because they were disabled, they were behaviorally wrong, they were mentally ill, or Jehovah's Witnesses were not racialized. They didn't believe in nationalism, right? They would not salute the flag. It's still true of Jehovah's Witnesses, right? So there's this sort of idea that, you know, the Holocaust belongs somewhere. I mean, Yehuda Bauer was the person who would argue with Elie Wiesel and say, this is a lesson of humanity. I have learned as a non-Jew so much studying the Holocaust. that has transformed me as a human being, not about my perception of Jews, but about morality and about what human beings are capable of. So that's how I would answer the question, that I really am a big proponent, a person who said, I'm not saying lose the Judaism or Jewishness at all. If you read my work, you'll see that. But what I'm saying is that how do we reach audiences that are interested in race, interested in gender? Just recently, we have more work on women in the Holocaust. There's a conference going on in Wagner College on Staten Island this summer that I'm part of, called Women and the Heroines of the Holocaust. So, but these voices have been subdued and ashamed, just like homosexuals and women that were raped, even though, that was breaking the law for Nazi generals.
Okay, thanks. So someone, another member writes, I don't know if this is a question as much as an accolade from a former almost neighbor on Old White Plains Road. One approach to addressing these issues would be a few thousand more leaders like you.
Aww. I said, in the beginning, what is my moral duty as a Muslim, about this? And I think, so much of what I do is informed by Islamic social justice. And I really want you to understand that, because it's so hard for me to teach Islam. I mean, I'm teaching a class called Muslims in America. And we started the class with, African Muslim slaves who came over to the United States in the 1800s. And the different waves of migration and how that changed. And it's very hard to teach Islam. It's actually easier to teach the Holocaust because of the audience. I'm not talking about the material, because the audience is already convinced that we are terrorists, that we are, this oppressive, now with Afghanistan and the Taliban, and that we are against human rights. And I keep reminding people that Muslims are really the victims of these extremists more than anyone else. So thank you for that comment, but it makes me sad, because I wish people would know that, Islam has so many wonderful things to engage with.
Thank you. I think it's the last written question I have. Anyone who wants to can send more at the moment. Now would be the time. Hi, Larry, I would like to also mention the idea that Palestinians are actually descendants of the Israelites. Any insight on that?
I'm not sure. I'm sure there are some, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think, we're all descendants of Isaac and Ishmael. I mean, in terms of theology and looking at religion, yes, then absolutely. I mean, I think that, look, we have to understand the suffering of Palestinians as well as the suffering of Israelis. And we have to understand that Israel has a right to a state, and we all have a moral duty as Jews and Arabs and Muslims and Christians to question ourselves when we think things are not moral anymore. I mean, just because we're, descendants doesn't make one better or less or more than one. And I think that, Israel has to make decisions and ask itself, what is going on? Why are we under attack? I mean, there's so many, I don't know. I haven't, I've heard people respond to the Amnesty International report, and I've heard people talk about that. And I think that, Israel needs to think about what it's doing. And I'm not saying that it's a horrible country at all. I love Israel. I think it's a very rich country with wonderful things going on. And we keep forgetting that Israelis and Palestinians are still working together on the ground. And we don't think of that. Like Arava Institute, where's Amy? That's one of the things that I love about the Arava Institute, is that it's, educating Jordanians, Palestinians, Jewish Americans, and Israelis together through the environment. And we keep forgetting that we have these organizations, we have people, willing partners that are opening up, schools for both Palestinians and Israelis. And that's the world I like to live in. And I choose to live in that world because you know what? I wouldn't be able to wake up in the morning the most amazing people I have met in this field is incredible. This is what keeps me going. The people who really are, they really believe in peace. I know it's hard. Maybe it's like a hippie thing to say, but that's all we have. I mean, I'm a cool hippie.
Thanks. Another question, interesting one. To what extent is Muslim anti-Semitism derived from the anti-Semitism long practiced by the Catholic Church?
Okay, good, really great question. There was, in 1847, if you look it up, I think it was 47, it's called the Damascus Affair. And the Damascus Affair was like the blood libel, which was, very prominent in terms of looking at anti-Semitism from the Christian point of view towards Jews. And that was the first time you see this kind of very kind of Christian sentiment. And I remember that Christians and Muslims were constantly trading. I just taught a class in Venice for 2 weeks, and I talk about the Jewish and Islamic influences in Venice, the kind of contact and exchange made by the Catholics. It was an amazingly multicultural city 500 years ago. I'm talking about Venice, and also the oldest Jewish ghetto, which was an amazing renaissance going on in this ghetto as well. But there were always Ottomans, right? And Persians coming through, and all of this trade and mercantilism that was really important. So I would say, yes, a lot of the Christian anti-Semitism was transferred to Arab country. And also remember, Arabs were colonized by Christians. So that anti-Semitism was already in the country, right? I mean, we're talking physically, right? Colonization is when another country like the British, who were in the subcontinent for 238 years, where my mother went to Catholic school because she didn't have a choice, right? I mean, this is like the process, the kind of imprints that are left over colonization. I mean, the fact that we all speak English, or in Algeria you speak French. I mean, I constantly talk to my students about like how you can see things, or in, what is Tripoli in Libya? That's an Italian term, right? Comes from the Italian who colonized. So there's layers and layers of this history. But of course, if you're in a country for 200 some years, there's going to be some kind of understanding of how we see this other, whether it's a Jew or a Hindu or some other religion, in terms of that climate and that culture that is having that contact. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but definitely yes.
Thanks. I think that was very insightful. I'm being reminded to mention from the Arab Institute, Dr. Tarak Abu Ahmed, the executive director, will be speaking at Larchmont Temple on March 10th at 7:30. Within the temple, the info will be put out soon, and everyone should stay tuned for that. Another question here. How does the Hand in Hand initiative promote peace among all people in the Middle East?
I don't really know what they're doing particularly. I mean, I've heard of them, so I'm sorry. I don't really know much about Hand in Hand. But I'll say the Arava Institute is really promoting peace in the Middle East. I think I joined them like in 2008, and I'm still there, and I'm excited because we're going to start some new initiatives for the Arava Institute, the new Gen board, and I'm very excited because I think it's also a place that has really grown and really been recognized. I mean, they were doing cutting edge work for a long time. I think the idea of having Palestinian leadership is really important. I think having, Israeli leadership is really important. And we've been through all of that in America. So I think the Arava Institute is one of the places that I really believe in. And it's also educational. And while you're doing this work, you're also getting a degree, right? So that's what I love about it.
Okay, thanks. I think no one has any other questions or topics or things to bring up. I think we've reached a conclusion. And I want to thank you very much, Dr. Afridi. I want to thank Joel Brill and Amy for initiating, bringing you to us, and to Marty and Jane and everyone else for helping this event to happen. It's a very, very interesting, stimulating discussion this morning, and look forward to seeing everyone else at our next events. Everyone have a great day.
Thank
Thanks.
you so
Thank
much,
you.
everyone, and keep the peace.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to ask.